Welcome back one and all to the first proper video in my Oh There's No Place Like Home for the Yugi-Days holiday special, where I discuss briefly every single Yu-Gi-Oh series and give my thoughts and opinions on them. As promised, I'm going to talk first about the original Yu-Gi-Oh series, or at least the original Yu-Gi-Oh series that was popularized worldwide. That being the anime titled Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, which was an adaptation of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist manga, or what was called the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist manga here. Because I am going to be talking about the stuff that did also occur in the manga during my manga reviews, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the filler arcs here, and talking about how it is details from the filler arcs that really contributed most to further Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. I want to get it out of the way right away. I actually do like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Filler arcs. They tend to be silly and the plotting tends to be very noticeably different from the plotting during the rest of the story, i.e. the parts that were actually written by Kazuki Takahashi. And they are filler in the truest sense. You could remove them from the story and lose absolutely nothing of consequence. But I still think there's some interesting stuff in them. First of all, it's because of the filler arcs that it was necessary to bring Pegasus J. Crawford, or Maximilian Pegasus as he's known in the anime, essentially back from the dead. In the manga, he died. After Yugi won his duel against him at Duelist Kingdom, he was approached by Bakura, and he was defeated and killed. But because it was necessary to bring him back for the filler arcs, well, let's just say...
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
Which I absolutely love, because I love Pegasus' character. And in fact, my own writings within the universe of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to check those out, hinge very heavily on Pegasus still being alive. Not only that, but the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, and even to an extent the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds anime, both depend on Pegasus being alive. Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is set at a school for duelists that was co-funded by Pegasus, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds era movie, Bonds Beyond Time, where the protagonists from the original series, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, teamed up to defeat a common enemy, makes it clear that if Pegasus had died, the world of 5Ds never would have existed. I mentioned in the introduction that it's during the filler arcs that the magical elements and the super advanced technologies really seem to get out of hand. The Orichalcos arc, or the Doma arc, I believe it was called in the Japanese version, introduced us to the concept of magical items apart from the Millennium items, an idea that GX picked up, I think as early as the first season, expanded the history of Duel Monsters and the Shadow games, and gave us the idea of multiple dimensions, which is, again, something that GX picked up on during a major arc of the series. You could even argue that the existence of multiple dimensions in the Yugiverse is the entire basis for the current series, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, the main premise of which is that 4 dimensions with only slight variations find themselves in conflict with one another. And the 2 filler virtual reality arcs, where the characters were literally immersed into a fully sensory realistic virtual reality game world, which is a much harder sentence to say than I thought it would be, definitely set the stage for the super advanced technologies that we saw later in the series. Gone was the need to explain any of the technology in the show. It had become truly indistinguishable from magic and would never go back. And personally, I don't have any problem with that at all. And it was during the final filler arc, the Grand Championship arc, that really set the stage for the kind of dueling that we would see later on in GX, where every character had a really obvious theme to their deck that somehow spoke to who they were as a person, which, while it caused some problems because some characters' cards just ended up being really lame, I do kind of like, because that way the character's deck says something about them and can be used to further their character development, if handled properly. Sometimes it was not handled very well. At the end of the day, the filler stuff from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime is varied and weird and manages to completely distinguish the anime from the manga without actually contributing anything to the story that matters to this story itself. Once those filler arcs are over, no character ever talks about them again in any meaningful way. Events from those arcs never contribute to events from later arcs, but they left such a lasting impression on the franchise that it almost feels like later series were based almost entirely on what was revealed in those arcs specifically. The writing in shows like GX, for example, definitely feels more like the writing during those arcs. So at the end of the day, without those arcs, I doubt we would have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise. At least not one that exists on the scale that we see today. So you can love them or hate them, but personally I'm thankful for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Filler arcs, and I wouldn't change them for anything. I know I made the mistake of not actually mentioning this during the introduction video, but I am going to save the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movies for a different video. The 2 Yu-Gi-Oh! Movies that are part of the modern continuity, that being Pyramid of Light and Bonds Beyond Time. And I am going to talk about them both as an extension of this discussion of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime filler arcs, because they both do tie into the show. So keep in mind that the next video will not be Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but those instead. All that said, guys, be sure to tune in next time because the fun is just beginning.